Hi, this is Kathy Miller of Simply Stated Business. Today I wanted to share with you 3 copyright dues for photo use. We all love to copy and paste photos for our blogs, for marketing. It just makes the written word all that much more interesting. But some people have the mistaken belief that they can just snag a photo off the internet, and the fact that it's on the internet makes it kind of fair game. Well, that's not true. So we're going to go through some 3 simple copyright dues when you want to use photos. Now, before we even start, I want everybody to know I am not an attorney, thank the Lord, nor do I play one on TV. So the following suggestions are just suggestions that are based off of my understanding of copyright provisions, and they certainly do not constitute legal advice. Okay, get that out of the way. So the first do is learn basic copyright laws. Now, there's different laws for different countries, so find out what the laws are in your country. What I'm going to talk about today is based off of U.S. law. In a nutshell, photos have copyright protection. It's not just limited to the written word. The creator of the photograph is the one who owns the rights, and the owners have to okay the use of their photos for you to use them. Now, there's different ways that can be done, and we'll talk about that. So if you don't have permission, don't use the photographs. Now, there are some exceptions. There's photos that are in the public domain, and the internet is not considered the public domain. The fact that it's on the internet does not mean it's fair game. There are some specific definitions for public domain. These are just a few. It would be if the term of the copyright expired, and I'll warn you, the length of protection is a long time, so I would assume it's not expired. If the photo was published before 1923, or if the photo is the work of the U.S. government. And then the last exception is if it meets fair use standards. And that is the rallying cry of every person probably who has been sued for copyright infringement is, oh, but I was only doing fair use. Well, probably not, or maybe not. So just be very careful about fair use. There are 4 factors that the courts consider when they're looking at fair use. One is the purpose and character of the use. So, for example, was this for commercial use versus nonprofit educational? So, if a teacher is using a photo in a classroom to teach students, it's probably going to be okay. But if it's for commercial use, you're selling something, then it gets a little bit more of a gray area and you have to meet other requirements. Another area for purpose and character for consideration is if it's a parody. So you're kind of doing a funny skit on the photograph or something, and maybe you recreate it. Even that's kind of you have to be careful about that. Or if you're doing a review, let's say you're doing a review of the product, and so you go to their website and you snag a picture of the product and do a review of the product. It's probably going to be okay, but still, there are all these 4 factors get considered. The second factor is the nature of the original. Now, this probably has more to do with the written word, if it was factual in nature versus creative work. So, in other words, if it was facts and figures and you're just repeating that, then you're probably okay versus a creative fiction. Since photographs are always creative, again, you have to be that much more diligent about copying and using photographs without permission. And it applies whether it's published or unpublished. So if I took a picture and let's say I emailed it to you and said, oh, I'm going to use this in my blog today, or I'm going to use it in advertising, and so you snag it and use it before I do, you're probably going to have a copyright infringement there, even though I haven't published it yet. The third factor is the amount, and It generally speaking, the less you use, the better. Obviously, with a photograph, that's a little harder to do, although you could use a portion of a photograph. But if you're using, let's say you use a very small portion of it, but it's the most recognizable part of the whole photo, then you're probably going to be in trouble with copyright infringement. And the last factor is the effect. If your use of my photograph negatively impacts my income potential, then you're probably going to have some problems. So let's say that one that you snagged that I emailed you, you take it to a market that I had planned on going to, and so now it's out there, it's been there. You're impacting my income, so you're probably going to have a copyright infringement there. So don't rest on your fair use laurels. Make sure you understand clearly and you have the permissions that you need. The second do follow licensing rules. Now you may use stock photos like those that like iStock photo or big stock photo, uh, where you pay a minimal amount for the use to download an image. Generally you'll see there's a standard license and an extended license. The standard license is the one most of us use, that is the $1 or whatever it is for downloading an image. That doesn't mean because you paid the dollar that you can use those images any way you want. They have limits on them. For example, they may have limits on the number of print copies you can do. So it may be very high and sound like a lot to you, but if it's something that you're going to reproduce and reprint over and over again, you have to be aware of how many copies you're making before you run up against the limits of the standard license. Also, another limit is that you can't reproduce it for selling something like putting the image on a t-shirt and selling the t-shirts. In that case, you would need an extended license. The extended license may permit you to use some of the things that are prohibited under the standard license, like, for example, the sale of t-shirts or mugs that have that image on it. Now, you also may be familiar with Flickr or Creative Commons, and that's where you get photos. You have the ability to download them and share them, but there's different licenses attached to them, so make sure you know which license apply to the photo image that you're using. Almost all of them will have at a minimum an attribution where you give credit to the owner. Some may allow it, the download and the use only for personal use. They won't allow it for commercial use. Some may have a no derivative where they won't let you change the original. And the last one is share alike, where derivatives are okay, but they want you to use the same type of license as the original. And then the last one, people hear this and they think, well, I'll solve this problem. I'll just take my own photos and use those. Most of the time that's a good idea, but even with those, there's a difference between taking them and publishing them. Taking them, pretty much if you can see it, you can take a photo, but when you go to your blog or wherever and publish it, you might be running into copyright problems. For example, let's say you take a picture and there's a person in the background of your picture and they're doing something that you think, boy, that would make a great ad. And so you use that person's image in the ad. Well, you're probably going to run into problems there. Another example would be, let's say you take a picture of a building sign, and even though that's fine to do while you're on vacation, if you go and turn around and use it for some commercial use, you may be violating some copyright protections there. You may have to get permission or pay a fee to use that sign's image. So even publishing your own photos, there's copyright issues to be concerned about. So again, in a nutshell, 3 do's. Do learn basic copyright laws for your country. Do follow licensing rules, and do publish your own photos carefully. This is Kathy Miller of Simply Stated Business, and I thank you for listening.